11.
Can you hear okay? Yeah, there we go, it's back on. So thank you for getting up early, and thank you to Sujatha and all the organisers for having me here. It's always an honour and a pleasure to be in India, and it's lovely to get to speak to so many young and not so young minds. So I thought about what would I say, and I think you all know about assistive technology. You probably wouldn't be here if you or if you didn't know, you should know from yesterday. So I thought I'd look a little bit beyond assistive technology, or a little bit beyond what you might think of when you first think assistive technology. So in what domains am I thinking about? I'm thinking about beyond products. You know, Sujatha and I have many conversations. There are many great young minds that come to us with yet another product, and they have not spoken to a single person with disabilities or disabled person. Doesn't fit any user needs whatsoever, but also they don't think about the service provision, or how they're going to manufacture it at scale, or how they're going to market it, or how they're going to talk to the government. We want to go beyond functional designs. I don't know about you, but I don't buy anything just because it's functional. I don't spend my money on things just because they do good. I spend them because I like them. I enjoy using them, and they give me an emotional reaction, and that's what assistive technology does too. And I think we can begin to go beyond niche markets. And if I didn't put the 5 Ps in here, Chapal might kill me. So here's the 5 Ps before I forget. Don't forget the 5 Ps, they're very important. So before I talk about beyond assistive technology, I wanted to take a step back and think about my first startup. When I was sitting here last night, or yesterday afternoon, I was thinking, when I was the same age as some of the younger people in the room, I had this great ambition. I was working in wheelchair biomechanics. I'd done my PhD in wheelchair biomechanics. I had become quite frustrated with this sort of dichotomy between the medical model, where all the doctors wanted to just fix the person, and then the social model, where we were meant to just fix the environment. And yet, we were doing this in the UK. We have a manual for streets, how to build accessible streets. That's back in, I've taken that from my PhD days, 2006. We had hospitals that were fully accessible, that were giving world-class rehabilitation. And yet, nearly 80% of the assistive technology we gave people was just abandoned. And when people did use the assistive technology, their rotator cuffs were tearing, their wrists were getting carpal tunnel syndrome, and they were unable to actually use the wheelchair. So we were investing millions, billions, and yet still we didn't seem to be making much of a difference. So I had my first initial startup idea, which was called SenseWheel. This is also my first ever logo design back a few decades ago. And the idea was, can we create a lightweight, wireless, weatherproof device which would measure the biomechanics of everyday interactions as people rolled around their lives or their cities? And so we designed some tech. We designed some sensors. They were wireless. We managed to fit them between the handroom. And we did lots of experiments. I had a lab. I ran this laboratory for UCL. So we set up lots of biomechanics experiments. We did multiple models of shoulder interactions. Managed to find really nice relationships. This is a linear relationship for those that aren't able to see the graph, and the x-axis is showing the peak force that you put into your handroom, and the y-axis is showing the force that gets translated into your glenohumeral joint, your shoulder joint. And you can see it's a nice straight line. It begins to get less straight at the top right. It gets a bit noisy, and that's partly to do with the deltoid muscle modelling. But it was lovely. We could start predicting just from the force that you put into the wheelchair what was happening at your shoulder joint. That seemed like a good idea. But then my first epiphany came, because I started testing this with users. They didn't care. How many of you care how much force is going through your knee joint? I mean, you don't care. You don't care how much force is going through your hip joint. You just don't care. And in everyday life, it's not very useful information to you. It's very useful for surgeons. It's very useful for biomechanics people. It's very useful to publish papers. But it's not very useful for wheelchair users. So that got me thinking, well, what if we made a smaller sensor? And then we were able to put it like a wristwatch, a little bit like this. This is going back about 10 years. Then maybe we could have a device where you could measure the pushes, and you could measure some interactions with the environment, and we could give more useful information back to the user. Again, I thought this was a good idea, and off I went for a couple of years doing this. And this all was part of my first startup experience, which I did whilst also working at UCL. And we did lots of sensor development. We built the sensors, we did some application development, and then we were lucky enough to come to India. So I had never heard of Professor Rao or Professor Bala, and actually the first project I ever did with IIT Delhi was not with them, because I didn't know them, right? So it was with the electrical engineering department, and we mapped the city. with some data collectors. We started mapping the interactions of how difficult it was to get around Delhi, and you can see that nobody's going through the centre of Delhi, because it's too difficult. We haven't got any maps for the centre of Delhi, because nobody's going there. Even though the metro was accessible, people couldn't get to the metro. And this was about 2015, that type of time. And I was sort of at a crossroads in my life. I didn't realise I was at a crossroads in my life, but I was at a crossroads in my life. And a decision time arose. I could continue to work on my startup, which I had realised was really hard. So I'm just letting everyone know, it's really, really hard. And there were problems with trying to get it to market. There's problems with scale and manufacture. There's problems with how we're going to market it. But we had plans. But what I hadn't appreciated was just around the corner was my second startup, and that was the Global Disability Innovation Hub. And the GDI Hub came out of the Paralympics. So I lived in London for the Paralympics. I went to the London 2012 Paralympics. It was the most accessible games ever. To this day, Tokyo might have outdone London, but they didn't get the chance because of COVID. But it was the first time that the Paralympics was sold out, and it was the first time that the main Olympics was fully accessible to everybody. It was built into the procurement. You couldn't buy rights for the Olympics without rights for the Paralympics. You couldn't get a contract to be the drivers that brought people around, all of the athletes around London, unless you had 15% of your workforce was disabled. So it wasn't enough that the vehicles were accessible to wheelchair users, or they had induction loops, or anything else. You had to have disabled employees. And what was funny was, this is a slide that Victoria Austin, my co-director, always shows. And on the left-hand side, it says, "Thanks for the warm-up." And it's got Channel 4's logo on it. And she says that she's the head of the Paralympic legacy. She says that the moment she realised all the hard work leading up to the Paralympics had been worth it was when on the closing ceremony of the Olympics, she was lucky enough to be there. She's walking out of the Olympic Park, and there's just this massive banner that says, "Thanks for the warm-up," because the Paralympics is coming, and it's going to be better than the Olympics. And it was great. And as part of this Olympics legacy programme, University College London decided to build a new campus, just like we're standing here in this wonderfully ambitious business park that IIT Madras has decided to build. UCL decided we need a new campus, so we're building a new campus. And so there was some money for what's going to go into this new campus. And so we put together a bid, myself, Vicky, here in the red dress on the right, and Ian McKinnon, who's standing next to Chapal in the middle of this photograph, which is taken outside of the World Health Organization. Now, if you'd asked me 6 months beforehand, do you know where the World Health Organization is? I don't know if I knew. Honestly, I'm not sure. I probably would have figured out it's in Switzerland. I think it's probably in Geneva. But I certainly never thought I'm going to go to the World Health Organization. But when we set up GDI Hub, we were lucky enough to get some flexible funding, just £10,000 or £20,000 that we bid for, and we went around the world. We went to Uganda, we went to Kenya to try and understand what's happening globally. We had this day in Geneva. We flew into Geneva, the four of us. There's Maria Kett on the right, Ian McKinnon, myself, and Vicky. And we landed and we had meetings with the International Committee of the Red Cross, the WHO, the ILT, all of these big boys in inverted commas, right, will show up. And Chapal listened to us. And he said, "This could be really exciting. I think this could be really exciting. We must get a photograph." So I'll let Chapal guess when that photograph was taken. But I didn't have any grey hair in this photograph, I'd like to point out, which I have a lot of grey hair now. But it was the start of a big journey for us. And this is a slide I stole from Chapal, and I use continuously, probably for about 10 years now. And it shows a pyramid with high-quality products for the rich and low-quality products for the poor, this kind of charity model. And I'm going to return, I want you to keep this pyramid in mind, because right at the end of this presentation, when we're looking at the future of assistive technology, I believe we're still doing this. Even though we think we're advancing everything, we're still doing this. So we got about thinking, well, why is this happening? How do we fix it? What do we do? So we started looking at the value of assistive technology, moving beyond a functional gap to what are the social contexts, what does it enable people to do, towards the identity and self-expression that assistive technology gives us. We looked at the global ecosystem. This is a valley of death. Everybody knows the valley of death. It's a nice inverted curve. And this is honestly where my assistive technology first startup is, down there somewhere in the valley of death, still waiting for somebody to do something with it. But you start off with this great idea and you've got loads of energy. There's like an inversion of this curve. Because at the beginning, when you've got all the energy and the ideas, everything's brilliant, and you throw all your time and energy into it, and then you have to start validating it. And that's the thing that we figured out was missing. This validation thing, time and time again, students, startups, even major companies don't validate well. And if you don't validate well, how do you get people to give you money to scale? People aren't going to give you lots of money just because you think it's a good idea or because 10 people that you've spoken to said it was a good idea. They're going to give you money if you can demonstrate, demonstrably to them, that there will be a benefit. And it's not just a social benefit. Everybody who's a social impact investor still wants a return on their investment. So you have to show both. You can hook them in with the social good, but they'll still want money. So we started working with a couple of projects right back in 2018. This is one on the traditional fabrication of lower limb prosthetic sockets. So for anybody that's ever worked with people who don't have lower legs, which Pal has, I know, it's a lengthy process that requires several hours of work. It takes a long time and several visits. And oftentimes in poorer countries or in rural settings, it's very difficult. You have to keep coming back to the clinic. It might be hundreds of kilometers away, or the clinic has to try and come to you. So it takes a long time. Every clinic I've visited ever in Kenya or Uganda has at least one bit of machinery not working, which they've somehow tried to hack or fix. So frequently, the production line just breaks because one component is missing, which they can't get into the country, no matter how hard they try. So we worked with a startup called Ampower that had developed a thermoplastic material. They were a great startup, full of energy, and they were looking to see if you could just mold in situ a liner and then a socket, and that socket then would enable people to walk. It was an interim socket, so you could readjust it, because when you first lose your leg, your stump will change mass, it will change shape as the wounds heal. So would it work? And you can see here, I'm not sure if these videos will play, this is Arnold, he's jumping up and down. This is just like 10 minutes after he's had his limb fitted, right? This was the type of evidence they were used to getting. It's wonderful, right? You look at that and you think, that's brilliant. There's a guy, couldn't play football, now off he is playing football, but it's not enough for investment. And what we then did was a full clinical trial. That was in 2018, we're now in 2022, and just the other day, I got an email to say, from the Journal of Prosthetics, International Journal of Prosthetics and Orthotics, dear Professor Holloway, your paper's now been published. That's 4 years. So on the startup journey, it's taken 4 years, and that's with our support, to run a clinical trial. And COVID was in the middle of it, which obviously made it longer, but it's still going to take 2 years. By the time you get ethical clearance, by the time you recruit participants, by the time you train the clinicians in country, by the time you run the study and collect the data and write the paper, that's 2 years. And funders don't get it. Venture capitalists don't get it. To get the validation data needs money, it needs investment into that valley of death. So we've done that. So then we started, well, okay, we've got this, we did 3 or 4 of these studies, and we began to realize what are the componentries that were needed in Africa. And we started an accelerator, and it's led by Bernard Chira in the front, a young, brilliant mind from Kenya. And we've supported 28 African startups. We've had 4, it's now 6 acceleration cycles. We've got this thing called a Live Labs network where the entrepreneurs can work with disabled people to design and test and rapidly iterate their prototypes. And we've developed at GDI Hub an inclusive entrepreneur curriculum and an inclusive entrepreneur toolkit. The toolkit's now online, the curriculum's coming very soon. It's open source, so you can have a look on the GDI Hub website. We did all that, and we sort of set that up at the same time that we were running all of this work with Ampower, and with motivation wheelchairs, and with humanity and inclusion. But there was still this massive gap, because these African startups had, not all of them, if I'm honest, some of them should just fail quickly. They're really great entrepreneurs, but their idea is not a great one. But some of them are really great, like really, really good. But we could not get people to put money into it. We tried lots of ways, and so we eventually decided to set up our own impact fund, so the Assistive Technology Impact Fund, and we thought, well, we'll test, can we make an impact fund work? We wanted to go beyond the product, so we would only take things that were looking at end-to-end service provision, innovative manufacturing, looking at the whole distribution and tech-enabled approaches to getting AT to people, and different financing models. So pay-as-you-go, for example, models of how to actually finance assistive technology, and all of that should come down into lifelong access to affordable tech that meets the real needs of real people who have the dignity of choice. And so we have invested in 5 companies. I've got 4 quick overviews here on the slides. And I'm not going to talk through all the text, but I've left them on here so that you can look at them later. The slides will be available. The first one shows HearX in the bottom left-hand corner. It's digitally enabled screening for hearing loss. You then get a low-cost hearing aid, and you use your mobile phone, Android phone, to be able to tune your hearing aid over the first couple of weeks. But also there's a WhatsApp group to give support. And so it looks at, so what do we do? It's a good model. It's come out of South Africa. It's great. It's come out of the audiology department down there. But they didn't really have a business model for the African market. They had a business model for the American market and had traction in the American market, but couldn't develop a business model for the African market. So we began to look at subscription payment models with them and distribution partners. Then we looked at health tech partnerships. So could they work with established companies to overcome their distribution challenges? So pharmacies, pharmaceutical companies, could we work with them? Then we looked at medical registration, helping them with their medical registration that they would need to get more investment. And then we worked with a flexible payment model. And finally, we worked on the whole app and onboarding process for people, because a lot of people were digitally illiterate. So all of a sudden, you've got an app and you've got a hearing aid. It's a lot of technology if you've never used a phone before. The second company was Miracle Feet, and Miracle Feet already have an established protocol for fixing clubfoot. It works very well. They have a lot of distribution around the world. That wasn't the problem. The problem was they were working off a charity model, and they wanted to move to a social innovation model. So we again looked at innovative business models. We looked at external new markets. We looked at practitioners' networks across Nigeria, and then switching towards a pay-as-you-go and switch-out model, and again, partnerships with strategic hospitals. The third is Koala. It's an upper limb prosthetic. It's like a trainer that you go running in. Put it on your arm. It's made out of the same material as a trainer, and you can fit it. I'm not a prosthetist. I have fitted one of these in Kenya recently, and I really am not qualified, in my opinion, to fit them, but the woman thought I'd done a good job. So the interesting thing about Koala is not just the innovation in the product, but they have a complete 2-year service package. So you get the product, you get different end effectors, and no matter what happens for 2 years, you are looked after. We looked at local partnerships, but also some global partnerships. So we had the Clinton Health Access Initiative in Sierra Leone help us with some of the market shaping and market analysis for them, as well as working with the local Ministry of Health and Rehabilitation, Sanitation. We did regional refinement. So what we found is everybody here and everybody in the UK, if you give a prosthetic device, especially an upper limb device, you want it to be functional, right? So that was the first slide ages ago. Assistive technology is functional. Let's go beyond functional. In Sierra Leone, most people without an upper limb has had their arm hacked off during the Civil War. They don't care about function. They want to look the same as everybody else. So for the first time ever, when they were going to the mosque or they're going to church, they just want to have an arm that looks the same skin colour as the rest of their skin, and they can go, and nobody will notice they don't have an arm. So we ended up having, Koala ended up having to design a cosmetic, which they'd never done before. And then people would switch that out at home, and they'd put the functional device in to be able to maybe write or pick up jerry cans or do something else. But it was interesting that that's what they needed. We also looked at strategic partnerships, and they now have, we helped negotiate Koala having an MOU with the Ministry of Health and Sanitation. And then looking at the regulatory system, as well as, well, Chappelle and I have talked about this a lot, so the problems with import and export duties. We need a moratorium on them globally, but they are still a challenge. And so finally, WASI vision. Glasses. How many people in this room are wearing glasses? Lots of you, lots of me, right? Probably don't ever tick the box that you're a person with disability or a disabled person, because you've got your glasses and you don't feel disabled in any way. So, but we still can't get glasses to 80% of people, which is insanity. We can put people on the moon, but we can't get glasses to people. So we worked with WASI, 2 brilliant African female entrepreneurs, to validate their business model, to look at production efficiency. So that we worked at UCL with the mechanical engineering department. They were initially injection molding their frames. It was never going to scale. So we moved them to a CNC production method. We got them trained by a UK company that was doing CNC production. We managed to get the UK government to agree that we could buy a £40,000 piece of equipment that could be shipped to Uganda so they could actually manufacture locally. And then we worked with them on identifying their USP. And part of that was a nationwide campaign, or an African-wide campaign, actually, for what should the designs look like. And they had 120 entries. We also raised their profile. And so the designs that you wear if you buy some WASI glasses are African designs, but also shaped for the African face. When I wear them, they fall off because my nose is different to an African nose, and they don't fit me well. But in the same way, my glasses doesn't fit an African face particularly well. And then we look to mitigate risk. Now, across all these companies and with others, so the people Trestle Labs, who are Indian, we have supported through impact validation. So how do we demonstrate the value back to investors? So this is a snapshot of the impact performance indicators, and actually Kobo or Trestle Labs came up to me yesterday and said, it's one of the most impactful things that's happened to us in 5 years was you guys helping us to do this impact report, because it makes a difference if you've got a company that's not you, bringing people to understand what is your USP, what is your value proposition, who are your competitors, where and how do they think, the customers think, you add value to their lives, would they buy the product again, where is the price point right? These types of things were worked through on the impact snapshot. So we looked across lots of companies now, I think it's 8 companies we've done. We worked with 60 decibels who had done this across Africa before, but we wanted them to have specific assistive technology domain expertise, so we would capture what was necessary to understand what works in getting assistive technology to people. The reports are currently being collated and published. You can see only the Wase one looks ready to go just yet, but in 2023 they will be available to one and all. And then we looked more generally, take a step back, across the whole ecosystem. So we know that digital manufacturing has so much opportunity. We know that artificial intelligence, so much opportunity, and yet why is it not yet scaling? So digital fabrication of prosthetics and orthotics, we got a challenge one day within the International Society of Prosthetists and Orthotists, I can never say that word, to say, well, we keep, every time you go to conferences, the ISPO World Congress, you'll hear more and more people, I've done CAD-CAM, I've done 3D printing of sockets, I've done some other digital fabrication method, and there's always a fight. In the room, there's a fight. There's the people who think this is going to change the world, and then there's the people who think it will never work. You can never digitalize prosthetics. It can't be done. It's impossible. It can't be done. So we thought, well, let's just look at what the literature says. So we're just finishing a full systematic review with ISPO, with a global panel that's taken a very long time, even to get the search terms agreed, but it's now complete. And one of the things we found, I'll show you a sneak preview, and this shows almost like a normal distribution going across the x-axis, which are the technology readiness levels, and the bar chart that's shown goes across the different prostheses. So lower limb, 3D printing, lower limb, CAD-CAM, other lower limb, upper limb, 3D printing, upper limb, CAD-CAM. But the overall picture is that in technology readiness level 1, we've got less than 9 papers, probably to be expected. You're just thinking, is it a good idea? And then it ramps up, TRL levels 2, 3, 4, 3 and 4 up at 70 papers, 70 published studies that are clinically valid trials of the technology. And then there's this massive drop. We get these ideas, we get them, the proof of concept gets validated in a hospital, probably with 20, 30 people, sometimes only 5 or 6 people, and then nothing, very little. So when you're looking as an investor, how do I know I should invest in this? Or when you want to convince the other half of the room at ISPO that it's a good idea, you need more evidence than 6 papers across an entire domain, and we're not doing it. So we're working now with a number of companies and with ISPO to begin to think about what is the evidence pipeline, what evidence should you need at each TRL level so that you can give evidence back to the community, but also to investors. And the investors are not just the venture capitalists. It might be UNICEF, one of the biggest procurers of assistive technology globally for education purposes of children. Or it could be the Ministry of Health, or it could be the Ministry of Education. So when you're an AT entrepreneur, you're speaking to all of those people. Those are the people you're pitching to, and you have different pitch decks for each audience, because each audience cares about a very different thing. We also did a wider innovation ecosystem mapping for the great report, the global report on assistive technology, which was recently published from the WHO and UNICEF. And you can see here that the x-axis shows percentage, the y-axis shows provision, product, and supply, and you can see massive amounts of product innovation. Loads of product innovation, brilliant. A little bit of provision innovation, and absolutely no innovation around supply. So Sujatha was one of the co-authors, the final author of this paper, and we found that nobody's innovating in that space. We've got all these products, and they're ready, they're good products, but we have no idea how we're going to supply them. Nobody's thinking about supply until after they finish the product innovation, and that's the person that was me right at the beginning. That's 6 years of your life. And all of a sudden you go, well, what am I doing? Do I start again? How do I start again? So if you're not thinking about it from the beginning, you're not going to move forward. So the other thing that we've started doing is some market tools. So AT 2030, along with that Scale, published a series of product narratives. I'd never heard of a product narrative when I started co-authoring these and developing the research protocol for them. But a product narrative is really a market analysis. It looks at the supply and the demand factors globally. These are focused on low and middle income countries to see why we're not getting prosthetics to people, why we're not getting eyeglasses, why we're not getting digital assistive technology. What's interesting, you should read these, they're worth reading, or flicking through at least, is that in digital assistive technology, you see mobile phones, you see screen readers, but in prostheses, you see digital. You see digital fabrication as a potential for unlocking the market access. In glasses, you see peak vision, which is unlocking how we scan for vision problems on a mobile phone device. So whilst digital is sitting over there as its own product narrative, it's also this cross-cutting theme across all the product narratives. And Chapal mentioned that yesterday, that digital is the future in inverted commas. But what does that mean? I think Professor Rao said to me, he wanted to know, what's the difference between digital and normal? Because digital seems to be in everything anyway. But I think it's a different focus on digital. It's beginning to realize that all of our lives are now mediated through digital interactions. And also the power of that mobile phone that's in your pocket. It's probably more powerful than the first computer I ever used. And you're just carrying it around. You think it's a phone, but you're carrying around a fully fledged computer. So therefore, what can you do with it? We started mapping assistive technology startups initially across emerging markets. This was our first innovators map, which you can find on the AT 2030 website. At the end, I'll show you that we're redoing it. So if you want to be part of it, please join. And I'm just going to finish up with looking slightly beyond niche markets. So I still think niche markets should exist. And actually, niche and markets maybe not the right terms, but niche assistive technology is absolutely essential. And it's a human right for the people who need it. But oftentimes, there's not a market attached to it. So it has to be provided through our tax. It has to be provided through the government systems to people. That's absolutely perfect. But I'm moving slightly beyond that into thinking about niche markets of mainstream assistive technology. So things like wheelchairs. If you can design a wheelchair, you can design a bicycle. Why aren't you doing both? Why isn't the technology you're figuring out powering your wheelchair also powering mobility scooters, which more older people will need? But also we're increasingly, I talked about the mobile phone, we're increasingly seeing that mobile phone device, that smart device, once it's connected to a decent internet connection, being able to do a lot of things that traditional assistive technologies did, things like augmented and alternative communication. So I'm going to end, this is a video from Google. Hopefully the sound will come through.
Enough. Pause it for a second.
Project Euphonia is a Google research initiative focused on improving speech recognition. Our mission is to help people with atypical speech be better understood. If you're an English speaker 18 or older and have speech that may be considered difficult to understand, you can assist us in our research by recording a set of phrases in exchange for a gift card. To communicate and to be understood is fundamental to the human experience. Our goal is to build something that works for everyone.
So why is that exciting to me? You see Manohar here from Microsoft as well, but that's exciting to me for a couple of reasons. One, when I started in assistive technology, you didn't have Google or Microsoft caring about accessibility.
Be better understood.
Technology. You just didn't care. It's also exciting to me because of this guy, who's one of the most understated humans in the world. But Richard Cave is one of my PhD students, but he's also a speech and language therapist of over 30 years working in the UK. And in the UK, he's worked with people with stroke, motor neuron disease, Down syndrome, and he's helped people learn to speak for decades. And then there was this opportunity to work with Google. So he's the speech and language therapist that's helped develop what was Project Euphonia. It's now called Project Relate. And we're working with Richard, with the International Alliance of ALS and M&D associations. So we work with the ALS Association. Every year, my students, for a whole term, just work with people with ALS and M&D, coming in every week for a whole 10 weeks and we design new technology. And sometimes we use technology that Google or Microsoft or Intel or somebody else have some fundamental algorithms that we want to use. Other times we're just developing the interactions, how people then understanding the interactions of those new technologies. But, Richard, when I was putting together this keynote, I said, what am I going to discussing with my team? What's the final point I want to leave? Because it's all really exciting. Google, Microsoft, everyone's doing these really great things. And the issue is, as Richard and I were talking, that this was just released. So first of all, you can see it's in English. That's the first problem, right? It's in English. So that knocks out quite a lot of the world's population. But secondly, it's just been launched in Ghana, for example, for free. Richard spent ages getting it launched in Ukraine for free, through Ukrainian. It's been launched in the US. It's not launched yet in Europe because of GDPR rules. It's in Canada. It's in Australia. But the people in Australia, in Canada, in the UK, and the US, they're all connected to the ALS Alliance. They'll get a bulletin. They'll know about it. People in Ghana don't know about it. The speech and language therapists don't know about it. How are you ever going to get them to know about it? How do you get them to realise, hey guys, there's this really great new app on the Play Store. Why don't you download it? It's really hard because it's never going to be the highest ranking anything on the Play Store, right? Unless we suddenly have assistive technology categories, which we should have, in my opinion. So it's exciting, and yet going back to that pyramid, there's a real risk, right? So if you've got ALS or motor neuron disease, and it's a horrible disease, and it's going to kill you, and you live in the United States, you'll at least have a much better quality of life whilst you're now dying a shorter period of time than you will if you live in Ghana, for example, or even in India. And that's not fair. So we need to think about that as we're developing these new technologies. So we are a hub. We like to work with people. I love working with Manohar and Japan and Sujatha and everybody here. So we'd love you to get involved. If you'd like to go on the Innovators Map and help us grow a global community, then there's a QR code you can join. And also you can follow us. There's social media, which I'm not on. I'm really rubbish at it. But I'm told there's even a TikTok channel now, apparently. Who knows? I don't know what they do on it, but apparently they do stuff. But some of the younger people show off demos. This is Tig Manchu, one of my PhD students, now a lecturer at UCL, demonstrating one of the technologies that he created. So I think together we can change the world. Let's make it happen. And I just want to thank the team behind the keynote. It's obviously not just me. There's the whole GDI Hub team, but specifically Vicky Austin, Ben Hardman, Dan Hyjas, Tiggy Bhatnagar, and Ben Oldtree. Yeah, and thank you to the people that fund me to do stuff. So thank you to UK Aid. And if you want to know more, you can check out the 80-20-30 website or the Disability Innovation website. Thanks for having me.
We are running a little behind time, but we still maybe can take one question. So anybody from the audience?
Hand mic, please.
You have to shout.
Bring the hand mic.
I don't know too much about what they did in the US. I know they developed hearing hubs. So they started to develop spaces where you could test your hearing in shopping malls. So they tried to make it more available, just like more normalized. So I don't know about you, but my mother, for example, wears glasses, but she won't wear a hearing aid. And if you ring her, you have to scream down the phone to her, but she's adamant that she's not deaf. And part of that is social change, the social acceptability of wearing a hearing aid, the social acceptability of being tested for a hearing aid. So they set up these hearing booths in places where there were lots of people. They tried to make it look more inviting, like it's not a medical test, it's just like, let's test your hearing, make it more fun, more music. That type of model, if you live in a really, really poorer setting, so if you're living in Kenya and you haven't got some of the more basic fundamental things, then having a fun, jazzy hearing booth isn't really the thing that you care about. You don't really even maybe understand the value of hearing, or even understand what you're losing out with hearing. So, and also people can't afford things. So in America, people could afford to hand over their credit card there and then and pay and have a one-off purchase, and that was sufficient. So in Kenya, we looked at, and in South Africa, we looked at this pay-as-you-go model, like would people begin to, as they use it, mobile, the other difference is, of course, in the United States, we were just talking about it the other day, you always have to still produce your physical credit card. It's amazing. Like, I mean, I can't remember, I don't know my PIN number, I don't know where my credit cards are, it's been ages since I haven't just tapped to pay for everything, right? But in America, you have that, whereas in Kenya, it's one of the first countries to have mobile money, so people have mobile money from the get-go. So doing pay-as-you-go mobile payments is actually very simple and more acceptable socially. So it was looking at testing that sort of business model and acceptability. Does that answer your question?
I will take the privilege of being a chair to ask you one more question. So how do you see successes across countries, like in Africa, like when innovation gets done in one country, is it able to really travel to other countries effectively, or and what, maybe you can discuss it offline also, but quickly you can say what is the ecosystem that actually allows them to go across countries, if you see successes?
Yeah. So there have been some successes recently. So for example, Dot Technologies that was developed, they did the Dot Watch. They have a new interface for graphics for visually impaired people. And Apple have just invested heavily into Dot research. And when we think about why did they invest heavily into Dot research, it's partly because they had a great looking product. Everybody wants to use it. If you've ever seen it, it's like you want to engage with it. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter if you're blind or visually impaired or not, you want to engage with this product. But it also has wider scale for the company, for Apple, than just working with people with visual impairment, right? They can see other opportunities for where people who are sighted might want some tactile or haptic interaction. So I think that's that wider thing. I think more traditional assistive technologies we've not seen yet, and things like, it would be lovely to begin to see, and hopefully we'll get to work with IIT Delhi and IIT Madras, this sort of UK, Africa, Asia, or European, Africa, Asia triangle where we help ventures go to the different countries. And I think regulation is key. Deregulation of some stuff, but easier regulation for others.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.